when you're talking about getting tens of thousands of applications, there just by definition almost has to be some level of screening that goes on.
Ask the Dean, episode 44, with my amazing mapped team. Dr. Scott Wright, how are you?
Yes, sir. Doing well. How are you, Ryan?
I am wonderful. And my mapped co-founder, Rachel Grubbs, honorary doctor from the Gray School of Medicine. I posted recently, I'm like, what would be some good pre-order bonuses for my new book, The Premed Playbook Guide to the Medical School Application Process? And one student posted, guaranteed admissions to medical school. And I said, done, to the Gray School of Medicine in 3212.
3212.
Done and done.
That's right.
All right. Oh, I'm excited for another Ask the Dean. I love the questions that we get into. As we're jumping in here, just a small behind the scenes thing. Rachel, can you send the link in Slack to kind of our note-taking, snippet-taking form that we're using for that?
Yeah. I've got it.
That'd be good.
Oh, I'll message you guys with that.
Yay.
Awesome. And then I'm excited for Mapped. We have access in our staging site where we get to play with stuff before it goes live to kind of a new user experience for entering courses and all kinds of stuff. So hopefully a lot less confusing and straightforward for students as they're getting into Mapped.
Yeah. Always on the upward trend of improvement and enhancement and new stuff and
exactly.
awesomeness.
And Rachel, do you want to talk about Ask the Dean not Ask the Dean, National Premed Day for a second, talking about all the fun stuff we have going on there?
Yeah, so this is really exciting. For those of you that have been hanging out with Matt for a year or so, you may remember that last year we had our first ever National Premed Day on May 28th, 5/28, like the MCAT perfect score. And it was a hit. It was our hope that it would be an annual thing, and that's what we're making it. So again, this year on May 28th, it's going to be in some ways like last year, and in some ways we hope better. So one day, all pre-med, pre-health, a little bit of pre-A talking all day long. This year, to make room for even more conversations, we're going to have actually 4 different tracks. So there'll be one that's specifically for like pre-meds who are undergrads, one that's so it's about the pre-med years, undergrads and non-trads. There'll be one that's sort of specifically about the admissions process. So, depending on where you are in your path to med school, there might be some topics that are more relevant to you than others. And then we're also doing a diversity in med track. So that'll give us a chance to have a lot of conversations through the lens of different identities. And, something I was pretty proud of last year is that we had a lot of representation from a lot of groups, but we didn't have a chance to do a deep dive into some of those identities. And, especially when it comes to intersectionality, when you're, multiple minorities or you're dealing with multiple underestimations, I think it's really good to give folks a chance to dig into those. So we've got a whole track that talks about that with different folks from different groups. So I think it's going to be even more detailed, even more chances to get the learning that folks want. I'm super, super thrilled about it. And as always, it will be free dollars. So $0.
Free as in 3 or free as in 0?
Free as in 0.00. So, who's invited? Pre-med students, pre-health students. We are doing a mini PA physician's assistant track this year. So we hope that PA students will attend. We hope that pre-PA students will attend. Thank you. We hope that pre-med, pre-health PA advisors will attend. So we're really looking to get the kind of whole community together to have these conversations. And, last year, a lot of the topics were sort of podcast format, and some will be like that, conversational. Some will be more like fireside chats. Some will be more sort of presentation. As always, we will leave plenty of room for questions and answers. So every session will have a dedicated Q&A component. It's going to be awesome. And people can sign up now at nationalpremedday.com, which I think I've got a banner for. If not, I'll whip one up real quick. Yeah, I hope to see everybody there.
It's going to be exciting.
So exciting. In terms of pre-asked questions, I don't see any in the private chat. Rachel, I don't know if you put some there before I jumped in.
I'll take a look. Yeah, there were one or two.
Okay.
Sometimes the system eats them when we go live.
There you go. Here's this first question here. I heard RVU is expanding to Billings, Montana in 2023. What is it like being the first class for a med school? Is there risk involved? So I will expand on this. I heard that this has been canceled. That there was something with the RVU president potentially having some issues. And so Montana said, no, we're done with you. But let's assume this is going forward. Dr. Wright, what is your thought process with first year med schools?
Yeah, so that's a good question. And I've had experience with several of these, and both from the aspect of as a pre-health advisor, running a pre-health program, my students going and interviewing at a brand new school, or also being on the end of it where at the Texas Application Service, where we were integrating in brand new schools. So I've had both aspects of this, and my feeling is that the risk involved is not really these days. There's not risk involved that the school's going to not get accredited. In other words, in order for a school to enroll their first class, in order for them to even begin to recruit or anything at all, they have to have from the accrediting body of medical schools, whether it's osteopathic or allopathic, they have to have the letter that says, okay, you can begin and you've been awarded provisional accreditation. So the chances of a school getting to that point and then somehow failing thereafter are pretty low. What that means is provisional accreditation means that they don't get full accreditation until they've graduated their first medical school class. So that's 4 years hence. And so what happens is in that 4 years, I think there's a little bit of angst on the part of some applicants that what if something happens in those 4 years and they don't get accredited and then my degree won't be any good and blah, blah, blah. And this is very, very, very rare. It hasn't happened, any time in the recent past. And I think the bigger issue for students looking at brand new medical schools is, am I the right fit for this? You have to be somebody who likes being on the cutting edge, being able to be, I hesitate to say a guinea pig, but you get what the drift I'm saying is that you have to be willing to be, in on new stuff. But the great part about it for many applicants is that they also get to help create what's going to be there. They get to create a culture. They get to create a lot of things relative to the curriculum and other things. They get to establish traditions. So if you're the kind of student who really likes the idea of being in on the very first part of things and being able to put your stamp on what that's going to look like, then I think new schools would be a great fit for you. If you worry about that and you don't want to be that kind of test student,
Crash test dummy,
then I would say maybe a brand new school is not the right school for you. And it just depends on your personality and your, your sort of take on those sort of things. And I had students who would go and interview at a brand new school and who were all excited, and they went, and it was a great experience for them. I had other students who came back and said, it's not, I don't want to, I just don't want to do that. And so, I just think it depends.
Yeah, I think I look at new schools like any other school is it's going to be a culture fit. It's going to be this fit, that fit. I think there's a lot of misconceptions around, that school doesn't have full accreditation. Like, well, of course not, right? They can't.
Right.
And I think, again, there's a lot of potential misconception, and it's going to be different by school, that it's a brand new school, so nobody knows anything, right? These schools are hiring people who know everything.
Absolutely.
Who are coming from other medical schools usually to now launch something new. So
that's exactly right.
I think the biggest challenge with a new medical school is the same challenge that every medical school has, but it's potentially unique for new medical schools, is the interpersonal dynamics between the dean of the medical school, the dean of admissions, the new curriculum people, and potential conflicts that come up because these are new teams that are working together. Right. Now, usually, again, that kind of goes out the window too, because these teams are typically working together for a couple years before they even get their preliminary accreditation to start accepting a class.
Yeah,
anyway.
That's exactly right. When I was director at TMD SAS, I was very involved in the establishment of Dell Medical School at UT Austin here in Texas. In fact, I chaired the Student Affairs and Admissions Committee for where we wrote all the policies and procedures and everything that needed to be written. A lot of it was we would look at other medical schools and say, what do we like about what this medical school does? What do we like about what this? So it's not always the idea that you're creating something from nothing. You're creating something that is a conglomeration of a lot of different things that you pick and choose that you want to do. And you're right that these especially the leadership of the institution, they've been together for 2-3 years. Often the dean is hired sometimes even 3 or 4 years before the school's gonna start, and that dean then puts together a leadership team, and those members are coming from other medical schools, certainly. So I agree with that completely, and I just don't think. I would not use the word risk when I would talk about new medical schools. I think the risk involved is so low that it's not really an appropriate word.
Yeah, and I'll share this real quick. And so the RVU Medical School in Montana is going on. It was this clinic that I noticed. So obviously, as a school, you need clinical rotations, and so there was, I guess, some issues with some leadership in the clinic. It was like, we don't want to deal with you. So stay tuned for that news. We'll see where that goes.
Yep.
All right. Let's go to some of these pre-asked questions. Now we see. Number 1, when should we start sending official transcripts to AMCAS? Can this be done before the application opens in May? How far in the future can we project hours on the AMCAS application activity section? So the first question, official transcripts, is pretty easy for all 3 application services. You cannot send official transcripts to the application services until that year opens up.
Right.
So
in fact, I will say that the Texas service has started a new policy where they don't want transcripts until they request them from you. Ooh. So that's a big change.
Interesting. Okay. That's good to know. Mm-hmm. And then how far in the future can we project hours on the AMCAS application? So the AMCAS instruction manual specifically states that you can project out until the estimated start of or projected start of medical school, which is typically August of the next year.
Yep.
A lot of medical schools start in July now, but I think historically you just put August of the next year. So you can project hours and time until then.
Yep.
assuming you are being honest and you actually are going to do that
Right.
experience.
Or no other pandemic hits or other catastrophe.
No, please, no.
I know. I shouldn't have said that. I put it out in the universe.
We are all, as a MAPT team, all officially 1 dose vaccinated. So that's good.
Yep. That's right.
All right. Next question here. Does non-science letter mean a letter of recommendation from a non-science professor, or can it be anyone, like a boss at work?
No.
Professor.
Yeah, there are some med schools that specifically say work experience or non-academic, but if they don't articulate that, then the default assumption is academic.
Yeah.
Yep. Cool. What are some good ways to approach the why our school question in secondaries? Obviously, I think the best answer is make sure you go to the cafeteria so that you can talk about the food and how you want to eat it. You have do some regression analysis and go, you have the most Chick-fil-A's within a 10-mile radius of the school, so I'm good.
I actually had a student this year who was writing his he was actually interviewing at a school and anticipated that question, why our school, and he had some great answers. He had done a lot of research about where the school was located. It was in a large metropolitan area, and he researched a lot about what the population of that area looked like and the different demographics of the area and the socioeconomic, situation in the area and stuff. And then he drilled down to how that school is addressing those disparities or those populations, and it was a fantastic answer. And I would say the same thing about secondaries is that, you really have to address, if you beat around the bush and stuff, they're going to know that immediately. But if you hit it directly on and say, I like your school, I'm attracted to your school because of X, Y, and Z, and you tie those to the values of the school, to the mission of the institution, and to where it's located, in the whether it's rural or serving rural areas, and whether it's urban, et cetera. So you really tie what you're talking about, and it has to be real. You can't just say, "Oh yeah, I want to do that," and there's nothing else in your application that seems to suggest that. So
yeah, I think the core of your answer is you have to do work, right?
Yeah.
Research the school.
That's right.
To research the area, the environment. I think the worst answers are the most generic of like, this school is going to prepare me to be a great physician. It's like, come on.
Okay.
Yeah. Or the very common, I know graduates of that school and they are great people.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or even worse, my dad graduated from there, so I want to go there. Or my mother went there because I want to.
Well, I might argue that the
halls.
worst one, which I've heard multiple times, is I'll go anywhere that takes me. And I definitely understand why, like, you feel that feeling, and like we're lucky to live in a country where all the med schools are great. So like I understand the sentiment, but dig a little deeper, get a little bit outside of your fear.
Don't articulate that.
An interview is 2 directions. So what are they offering you?
Yeah, exactly. That's right.
Oh, yeah. All right. Categorizing my classes from 2010 to 2024. Should I just have a huge senior year or evenly divide my courses freshman to senior? Rachel, you're the application expert.
The answer is you should have a huge senior year. So this comes up a lot. So if you search the mapped group or just go look in the AMCAS handbook, you'll see they actually divide it out. So if very few people have done 8 nice, neat semesters, right? So in the case that you have multiple years or transfers or non-traditional work, what AMCAS advises is that you go essentially by groups of credits, and it doesn't have to be on the nose, right? So I think they say freshman year is usually 30 or 35, and then sophomore year is usually up to 60 or 65 credits. If you land at 67, that's fine. But once you go forward, you don't go back. So that means that a lot of people have giant senior years. It just encompasses a long period of time. That's fine. That's normal. And that's part of why the application services don't just look by year. Sometimes they'll do things like, pull an analysis of GPA of the most recent 60 credits, because that might be half of your senior year, depending on how much, that'd be a lot of DIY work, but
Right. Yeah, this is a holdover from the, years back when higher ed was strictly, 4 years, and there was a freshman, sophomore, junior, senior, and everybody was pretty much full time. And, back, we're talking about, 100 years ago, or, 50, 70 years ago. And it's just not that way anymore, but the language and the structure still exists. And so it's a little confusing.
Yes. I took course credits, satisfactory versus unsatisfactory, for undergraduate research for 2 semesters. All I had to do is participate in a research lab with a PI and then submit an essay about my experience to the director of undergraduate research office. This also helped me publish a commentary. Should or can I enter it as 2 different activities, research and publication?
Publish a commentary makes me nervous because it might have just been a semantics thing, but it sounds real informal.
I don't know what that means, commentary. I'm not sure what that means.
Yeah, I don't know either.
But to the point, even if it, let's say, for example, this also helped me publish a paper, let's say, or a poster presentation. Should I or can I enter it as 2 different activities, research and publication? I know there was a big debate about this in the Texas system, and they really don't like you doing that because that sort of double dips and stuff off of one activity. I would lump it all into one category.
Yeah. Yeah, I think this question comes from students who think like, oh, I have to have a publication, so I need to list it separately. And I just don't think schools are filtering based on must have at least one publication activity in their application. They're filtering stats and then going from there and looking at the activities more holistically.
Yep.
Alrighty. Is participating in community health fairs to perform screening such as blood pressure, etc., considered clinical? Sounds like it.
Yeah, I would say.
Yeah.
Dealing with patients and
doing medical assistant type stuff.
Right.
Blood pressures and blood sugars and
all
that kind of fun stuff.
Yeah.
Yep.
I'd say so.
I like it.
Me too.
All right. On to some live questions.
Oh, yeah, it's a biggie.
Big one here. What advice do you have applying to Texas schools as an out-of-state applicant? Don't. Looking at University of Houston College of Medicine, which states out-of-state applications welcome, and TCU and UNT HSC School of Medicine. So just to clarify, University of Houston, Scott, that is a public school, part of TMDSPS?
Public school and tiny. Their entering class is 30.
Yeah. TCU, UNT HSC is a private school, not part of TMDSAS.
Correct.
The MD school. They do have a DO school.
Yeah, UNT does have a DO school, the primary school there on their campus, and then TCU students take their classes there as well.
Yep. So 2 different kind of categories there.
That's right.
I'm currently a paramedic and would like to eventually be a medical director for an EMS agency. Texas doesn't have a scope of practice for EMS, which is attractive to me. Doesn't have a scope of practice for EMS. That's concerning and doesn't sound right, but okay.
Yeah,
and I believe going to school there will help network when residency and fellowship opportunities come out. I'm applying to New York State public schools and out of state. All right. So at the end of the day, the question is Texas public schools like University of Houston have a 10% cap based on state law.
That's correct.
So
that's correct. And I can tell you where that mainly shows up for out-of-state applicants to Texas schools is it mainly shows up in the MCAT score. What it vastly increases the competition, which doesn't radically change the average GPA for students seeking entrance as out-of-state applicants. GPA has to be strong, of course, and I'm talking about 3.7 and above. But MCAT score shoots through the roof because there's so many applicants from out of state, and there's so few places available. And the cap, the 10% cap is a cap; it's not a requirement. So the schools don't have to accept, any if they don't want to. That would be completely up to the individual institution.
Yep. And the other school, UNT HSC, is a private MD
Yeah, the TCU.
And so they don't have caps,
right?
Because they're private schools. Now,
right.
I don't know if are they potentially similar to Baylor, where they are getting some funding, and so there's
not. There are only 3 private institutions in Texas that are med schools. The Baylor College of Medicine, which gets some state funding, and therefore they have a cap, which is lower than the 10%. They enforce it around 35%. TCU, as well as Incarnate Word University's College of Osteopathic Medicine, aren't required to enforce anything because they don't get any state funding.
Yeah. Okay. Alrighty. That EMS no scope of practice just doesn't make sense to me.
I don't know. Yeah. I don't know anything about that.
It's like, hey, I'm an EMS. I'm going to do surgery on you because I don't have a scope of practice. So, hey, sky's the limit. And that's where we get new seasons of Dr. Death.
Yeah. Jump in my van and let's do this.
Oh, ick.
Got a scalpel. Anyway, is biostatistics considered a math class, and would you recommend adding it to the science and math GPA calculation? Sounds like it.
Yeah, I would say so.
That is math.
Yeah. I mean, it really depends on where it's taught. If biostat is taught in biology, it would still go in the BCPM. If it's taught in mathematics or in a stat department, then it's still going to be counted as math. So either way, it's going to go in that BCPM.
Yep. The only caveat to that is a COMIS does not count math as a science.
Correct.
Yeah. So
that's correct.
Potentially good for non-math people, strong math people.
Yep. All right.
My question has to do with honors scholarships among also their prestigious summer and postgraduate research programs. Are such experience essential to very selective medical schools in terms of not only gaining experience, but confirming other aspects of your application, leadership, GPA, etc.? I'm thinking about the multiple SERP programs across the country. So do we have a definition of SERP?
I think it's Summer Undergraduate Research Program. Yeah,
there you go.
I didn't mean to step on your toes, Rachel.
All right.
Yeah, so SERP programs, I don't know a ton about them, but just a quick Google search, it looks like they are kind of throughout the country. It looks like at lots of good schools. Mm-hmm. My assumption is just an activity to do during the summer to potentially put on your application. Mm-hmm. Now the question is, are they essential to very selective medical schools?
No,
not at all.
No, not even research is essential to very selective medical schools.
Even very selective research schools.
Right.
I talked to, I'm assuming, I forget where it was, but I'm assuming it was at the UC Davis conference. having a conversation. It actually might have been the WAP conference, the Western Association of
Advisors.
Health Advisors. Yeah. Talking to either dean or director of someone at UCSF, right? This huge research-oriented medical school. And he's like, one of the biggest things that we want to try to get out there is that you don't have to have research to apply and be competitive at our school. We look at everyone, right? And obviously, yes, you need to do research once you're here, because that's just a big part of who we are. But you don't have to be this huge research person to come here. We're looking at everyone. So there's just lots of misconceptions around research and medical school applications.
I agree completely.
Yeah. The thing I've been saying lately, which is, so it's a little exaggerated, but I always say research is the most overrated part of a medical school application in terms of the pre-med world.
Yeah.
No,
I would agree with that. I can't count the number of times someone's told me that they're rock solid on their extracurriculars, and then they name clubs and research. And I ask about clinical, and I kind of get I'm like, wait.
Did you not hear? I have 3 first author publications, Rachel.
Yes. Those are just people that I really want to educate.
Yeah.
Yes.
Of course, I don't like blood and stuff like that, but I can do research.
No. I don't think I've ever had a pre-med say that to me. Okay.
There have been med students, I'm sure at every med school, who have fainted in anatomy lab, who have fainted in their first surgical rotation. It happens. It happens.
Yeah, surgical rotation. There's usually on the pre-med hangout at least once a year a whole thread about all the things you can do to prevent the fainting. Yeah. Like, did you eat a little but not a lot? Are you practicing bending your knees so they're not locked?
Yeah.
Are you breathing through your mouth, not your nose? It's great.
That's funny.
Okay. So on relocation.
Given that relocation is not an option for me at the moment, I plan on applying to only one school my first cycle, the one closer to my home, and that is a great fit for me. Any specific advice or strategy on this? Yeah. Cross your fingers.
Yeah.
But that's the same advice for anyone. So
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's hard.
If it is what it is, then you go for it and hope for the best. And if you don't get in that cycle, then you re-examine what you're going to do to make it happen the next time. And so, yeah.
My piece of advice is if you're in that area, you're from that area, if you know anyone that knows anyone, like lean on those networks. I had a student a couple of years ago who was a pathology assistant, so a different kind of PA, and she applied to medical school, to one school, the program. She worked at an academic medical center that had a medical school attached to it. And she applied to that program, the only program, because her husband had a job and couldn't move. And she didn't tell anyone where she worked that she was applying to medical school. I'm like, what are you doing? Like, your bosses probably are on the admissions committee. Like, and so next time she applied, we worked together, and she applied to 2 schools the second time, and she got into the one school that she wanted to go to the second time. But it's a risk, right? Getting into any medical school is hard. With only one school, makes it harder.
Yep.
Yeah, and I mean, I like that this person adds in the parenthetical statement that it's a great fit for me. So they seem to really like the school. It's not just the location. And I think, that'll be important in those secondaries and interviews that, my best friend happens to be my college roommate, but I don't tell her you're only my best friend because you were the girl in the bunk, next to me. Like, you gotta dig deeper for a better reason.
Yeah.
All right.
Can you talk about screens and if the school you worked at had any? Was it?
Well, we used to open the windows. We used to open the windows all the time. There were screens on the windows, and some flies wouldn't come in and stuff. And
I thought you were going to say we would open the windows and let some blow out, and those were the people we screened out.
No. Oh, you're talking about different kinds of screens. Oh, I see. So I think every medical school has some level of screening that takes into consideration MCAT and GPA of some sort. Now, it may be rock bottom stuff. I mean, we literally would get people who had a GPA of under 2.0, and this was not, there were no trends available. I mean, there were no trends present. So, we would get clueless, I hate to say clueless, but, people who really hadn't investigated the process and didn't really understand what was going on.
To the whole process, right?
They were
in the definition of ignorant.
Yeah, they did not understand what was going on. And so the medical school is not going to waste time on somebody who like that. So there may be, some cursory examination of these applications, but they're not going to do deep dives on applications that clearly are not qualified to come into medical school. So now, having said that, if there are students who have a cumulative 2.5 GPA, but are postbacks and their postbac GPA is a 3.7 or a 3.8 or 3.5 or whatever, and so that's a different story, and they screen those in different ways based on the different numbers of the GPAs and stuff to put them in categories on how they're going to be examined and how deeply and who's going to examine them and stuff like that. But my feeling is that logistically, when you're talking about getting tens of thousands of applications, there just by definition almost has to be some level of screening that goes on.
Yeah, and there are some schools that'll say we look at every application, and with the context, the subcontext of we don't screen. And I always like to add a little bit extra onto that for students to understand. What they're not telling you is that they still sort and rank applications and go, hey, we want to see the highest MCAT, the highest GPA first. And you may have the lowest stats in a pile of 8,000. We're only inviting 600 for interviews. Mm-hmm. We're never going to see your application.
Right.
So
that's right.
It's hard, and it's frustrating. And this is a discussion, it seems like we have on a weekly basis, of transparency in the application process.
Yeah.
There are a lot of kind of perverted systems in place where schools aren't transparent about their cutoffs, so that potentially more students apply, and they do it under the guise of, well, we want to make sure that we're catching all of the good people out there who may not have the best GPA, but they're also saying, give us your money during the secondary application.
That's right.
And so there's lots of I don't like it. It feels icky to me.
I agree. Speaking of ignorant callers and stuff, and I don't mean, I don't use that term in a pejorative kind of way. I just, just strictly that they don't know.
Yeah.
And we would have students, interested individuals that would call the admissions office, and that they would say, hey, I want to go to medical school. When do you guys enroll?
Yeah.
And we're like, wait a minute, what? Yeah, I mean, it's just like, wait a minute, what planet are you on? I don't get this. And so they were shocked to know that you had to have prerequisites, you had to have basically a college degree, that you had to apply a year and a half. Yeah, I mean, all this stuff. And then they were like, and then they would get mad. They would, well, that's ridiculous. And they'd hang up on us and stuff.
Don't you know who I am?
I know.
I used to get a lot of that in test prep too. People who, I think often because they didn't know and didn't have advisors to tell them, would call us looking for help with the process. And I used to get a lot of, well, can I just take the MCAT and see if I ace it? And then if I rock it, I'll go back and take the prereqs.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, I mean, if you have the world's best critical reading and thinking skills, maybe that'll work for you. But like, it was really hard for them to understand that it was a sequence, and like, you're going to need that content on the exam. And, even though the exam is more critical thinking than content, there's that contextual based.
Yes.
And yeah, I had people be annoyed that, they'd call in April and say, well, I want to start med school this fall, so can you help? I'm like,
it's not gonna work.
No. But yeah, it's really opaque. You go to the
I think
WM. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say there's some schools in the Caribbean that they could go to. It would take them.
I don't know.
That would take them. Yes.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean they'll graduate.
No, but that will take them.
But even April to July or August is pushing it for that timeline.
Well, I'm not talking about the better of the schools in the Caribbean.
Yeah, that's true.
I'm talking about
some of them are more stringent,
reputable than others. Right.
Yeah.
That's right.
All right.
Yeah, but I mean, I think if you go to the AAMC website, what I always say there is there's like almost too much information for it to be helpful. Like you click and click and click and click, and you keep getting walls of text. And at no point is there something that just simply says, tell me where you are in your life right now. I'll tell you what you need to do, which, by the way, is why we made Mapped.
Yep.
Because, it's not obvious what the path is.
Mm-hmm. Yep. That's right.
All right. Let me see.
And hence our estimable Dr. Gray's new book, which lays a lot of that out for you.
Oh, we're plugging things again. Here we go.
I'm just saying. My estimation is somebody can pick up that book and have a pretty damn good idea of what this is all about and what to do.
I'll make it a ticker for a second while we dig into our next question so y'all can jot down that app. Okay. There we go. Comments.
I was halfway through a semester of research when schools were shut down due to COVID, and I graduated that semester. To be honest, because it was a year ago and the research was never concluded or published, I really don't think I could discuss the research confidently in an interview. I do feel like the brief learning experience was valuable, though. How could this be classified in an application?
That's a good question. Honestly, I would say almost the way you just iterated it in that question. I learned some things. Here's what I learned, but got cut off because of COVID, and I graduated the next semester, and I didn't, really can't talk about it very confidently because it got cut off, but I did learn some stuff while I was in there. I mean, that would be what I would say.
I think it depends on what the research was about, because you can research even now kind of the background of what you were studying and learn about everything that you were studying. You just can't talk about what point forward. Yeah. And so I think you put it on your application and you say, well, here's why we were studying what we were studying. And because it's been a while and it got cut off, I can't really talk too much about it.
Yeah.
I think
that's right.
I think they'll be understandable.
No, absolutely.
All right.
I did a do-it-yourself postbac this year, so I'm not getting a committee letter and sending stuff on my own. How does this work? Do I just have my recommendations sent directly to the schools from the professors? Good question. We don't talk about this much. Yeah,
this is a really good question. I actually got this from one of my students last week. It's a really good question. I think Interfolio is the way to go.
Yeah, explain what Interfolio is.
So Interfolio is a letter service where all you establish an account there. You have to pay for it. It's not a whole lot, I don't think. I can't remember the fee.
Actually,
but
it's free to store all your stuff now, and they changed their model a couple of years ago, and now you pay when you transmit.
When you transmit, right?
Yeah.
And all the letter writers send it all to Interfolio, and then Interfolio will send it to for example, the Texas service. The Texas service pulls it in electronically from Interfolio, and I think the same thing happens for the schools through AMCAS schools and ACOMA schools.
Yeah, so there are two ways to send letters. One is through a dossier type service like Interfolio, and there are a few other ones, but Interfolio is the most popular one. And just kind of transparently, it's something that's on the timeline as I'm pointing to Mapped here. It's something I would love to see in Mapped at some point, so that you can collect letters of rec inside of Mapped. The one benefit of doing it through Interfolio, even though you have to pay extra, is that you can start collecting letters of recommendations now before the application cycle opens up. If you want to send directly to the application services, you can. Each application service has the ability to upload letters of recommendations directly to the application service. If you're applying to multiple application services, your letter writer will have to upload to multiple application services, and they can't upload those until you actually have your application open and that letter writer's name input into the system to request that letter.
Right. So, hence, the dossier service, like Interfolio, makes total sense. Yeah. It's a smoother, less cumbersome process. You do pay a little bit of extra, but I think for the peace of mind of it and the less amount of work that is for your letter writers, the better.
Yeah. And there's one benefit that comes with Interfolio is that they have the ability to check letterhead and signature and date to make sure that the letter meets the requirements that most schools have, that it has to be on letterhead and has to have a date and a signature. If Interfolio does their checks, their super secret checks, and says, hey, student Sally, your letter writer's letter doesn't have a signature, you need to go tell them to re-upload it. You get that done before there's issues uploading it directly to the application service, and then you never really find out, and schools have an issue and you don't know. And
Yep. Here's where I insert my longtime pet peeve rant that many schools still require ink signatures.
It's ridiculous.
I have a printer, but I haven't used it in 6 years. Yeah. I can't. I e-sign everything, but often for letters of rec, you're going to have to tell that person to print it out and sign it. And I like to sign mine with blue ink, so it's super clear. It's ridiculous.
Oh wow!
They'll catch up someday.
Yes, when we get some super cool features in Map that allows some security around that signature, we'll do that.
Oh yeah, I was going to say when these students are deans of med schools, but but maybe sooner.
Yes.
Well, right. That's interesting. When we're talking about things like holdover from the past, such as this signature issue. I was thinking the other day, Ryan, I'd be interested in your comment about this, that at least for I understand where med school, where we're coming from, where med school is full-time school. Mm-hmm. You can't go to med school part-time, at least in the U.S. I don't know about internationally. But what that does is that takes so many people out of the mix who can't do that, and basically says to them, you can never be a doctor.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, when is the day going to come where some med school says, we're going to change that? We're going to change the dynamic here.
Yeah.
And we're going to provide a way. Maybe it's a 6-year path. Maybe it's an 8 path. I don't know what it would be.
Yeah.
But we're going to provide a pathway for people who can't do that.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts about that?
So I'll give you my thoughts because this is the kind of stuff that I lie awake and think about. And I've had a conversation, Rachel, with John, who about not specifically a part-time longer medical school, but virtual medical school.
Yeah.
And this was pre-COVID. I had this conversation. I said, there's no reason in today's day and age when medical students are complaining that they're paying schools $40, $50, $60,000 of tuition to sit at home and study third-party test prep material. Why am I paying tuition for that? There's no reason in today's day and age that you can't have virtual first 2 years of school to where you can stay home, you do the work, and maybe that helps with the people who need it part-time, right? Because they can make their own schedule. You set up some specific rotations that need to happen, right? Anatomy lab and stuff like that. You figure that out. And then you have a dedicated rotation site for the 3rd and 4th years that everyone goes to.
Yeah.
And in my mind, the very easy way to do this right off the bat would be dedicated to people who are interested in family practice and say,
absolutely.
This is only for people who want to go into family practice. You don't have to try to match because we have a program, right? We're setting up a brand new residency program. We're going to do 10 students a year to start off to prove this capability. And guess what? It's free. It's free medical school. And there are lots of programs doing this now. Purdue is one of the biggest institutions that I know that's doing this for some specific majors, where you go to school for free and you are basically signing a contract that a percentage of your salary goes back to the school in the future so that you don't have this debt hanging over you.
Yep.
It's very similar because a percentage of your pay is going away, but it doesn't force you to go into the highest paid field to pay back all of these debts. You go do what you want, and a percentage will go back to the school. And I think it makes perfect sense for lower paying fields. Unfortunately, they're lower paying, like family practice, like pediatrics, to where we can get students who want to go do those things, but maybe don't because they're pressured to go into a higher paid field. And then we're losing out on amazing family practice docs or amazing pediatricians or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
So, and all of this stuff is going through my head pre-COVID, and then COVID just proved that my model would work.
Yep.
So
that's right.
Now it just needs to happen.
Yep. That's right.
Well, that'll be our next company.
So
there you go.
College of Medicine.
What did we say? Coming 3212?
3212. There you go. Yes.
All right, 6:54. We probably have time for one more. Let me see where I was in the queue.
But to answer your question specifically, Scott, I think part-time medical school, there's no reason in my mind why we don't have part-time medical school.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of ego wrapped up into that.
Ego. I did it this way. Everybody has to do it that way.
Yeah. You can't prove to me that they're going to be as knowledgeable. Make baloney.
Yeah, it's baloney. You're right.
Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, because learning never works when it's spaced out at intervals.
Who created this space interval? Oh man.
Yeah. Cramming is definitely the best way to retain
best way
forever.
When you put it that way. So.
Education nerds having a little moment. Okay. There we go.
When making a medical school list, should we avoid public state medical schools as an out-of-state applicant? My state, Oregon, only has one medical school. Or one MD school. I was going to say, no, they have two medical schools. They have Western. I forget. It has a different name, but it's in South Oregon, the DO school. Anyway, so my typical philosophy is check the MSTAR.
Yep.
Not every public school is built the same. Here, University of Colorado is very out-of-state friendly. University of Michigan, very out-of-state friendly. And so you have to check the public schools and see if they're out-of-state friendly. Yeah. And really, at the end of the day, my biggest wish when I talk about this, my biggest concern is just make sure you're educated that there are in-state, out-of-state biases when it comes to public schools.
Absolutely.
As long as you know that University of Arizona Phoenix has a 24%, and I'm making it up, but it's somewhere around there, 24% out-of-state acceptance rate according to the MSAR for the last application cycle. As long as you know that and you're okay with that, apply.
Go for it. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And, when you talk about DO schools, very few are state institutions. And so,
Yep.
there's a few, but most of them are private. So it doesn't, that doesn't really apply.
Yeah.
to
And
DO
private doesn't necessarily mean they don't care about residency.
Right.
Baylor, we talked about earlier. Baylor
Right.
cares about residency, and
Right.
there's one DO school. I think it's Arkansas College of Osteopathic Medicine is very in-state friendly.
Yeah.
In Jonesboro, Arkansas, northeast Arkansas, the ugly part of Arkansas.
Oh,
I used to live.
Somebody lives there and loves it. So
it's flat. It's flat rice fields.
Scott says, "I used to live there. I'm allowed to make fun of it."
Yeah, it's a lot of cotton fields and rice fields. It's flat and not necessarily too attractive. So
yeah.